John's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces as his father's voice thundered across the dining room, calling him filthy in front of his entire family. The word hung in the air, heavy and venomous, silencing the clatter of silverware and the hum of holiday chatter. At 25, John had come out to his conservative family in upstate New York, hoping for acceptance, but receiving a wound that cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. It was Thanksgiving, the table laden with turkey, cranberry sauce, and the weight of unspoken expectations. John had driven up from Manhattan, his stomach knotted with nerves, knowing this was the night he'd tell them about Liam, the man who'd stolen his heart. He'd met Liam 3 months ago at a Greenwich Village bookstore, their hands brushing over a worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Liam's easy smile and quick wit had drawn John in, and soon, their coffee dates turned into late-night walks along the Hudson, sharing dreams under the city lights. For the first time, John felt seen, not as the dutiful son of a rigid family, but as himself, flawed, hopeful, and deeply in love. But now, sitting at the polished mahogany table, John felt the air grow thin. His mother's eyes darted to her plate. His sister froze, and his cousins exchanged awkward glances. His father, Richard, a stern man with a graying beard and a voice that commanded boardrooms, had erupted when John mentioned Liam. "You're choosing this filth over your family?" Richard's face was red, his fist clenched around a wine glass. "You're no son of mine." John's throat tightened, but he refused to look away. "I'm still your son," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "And I love him." The room fell silent, the weight of his truth pressing against the walls. His mother, Ellen, reached for his hand under the table, but her touch was fleeting, her loyalty torn. His younger sister, Clara, whispered, "John, don't," but it was too late. Richard stood, pointing to the door. "Get out." The drive back to the city was a blur of headlights and tears. John gripped the steering wheel, replaying his father's words, each syllable a fresh cut. He'd always known his family's values, church every Sunday, tradition above all, but he'd hoped love could bridge the gap. Now, alone on the I-87, he wondered if he'd lost them forever. In Manhattan, Liam was waiting at their shared apartment in Chelsea, his warm presence a balm to John's raw heart. "You're enough," Liam whispered, pulling him into a hug. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city's hum a distant comfort. John wanted to believe him, but the sting of rejection clung like damp cold. He didn't know then that this moment, his father's cruelty, his own defiance, would set in motion a journey that would test his strength and redefine family. The next morning, John woke to Liam brewing coffee, the aroma filling their small kitchen. "We'll get through this," Liam said, handing him a mug. His blonde hair caught the sunlight, and his eyes held a quiet resolve. John nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd built his life around his family's approval, top grades, a finance job at a prestigious firm, a life that checked every box. Coming out had been his first rebellion, and now he was adrift. Determined to move forward, John threw himself into work. His days at the Wall Street firm were grueling, but they kept his mind off the silence from home. No calls from his mother, no text from Clara. Only Liam's steady presence anchored him. They spent evenings exploring the city, jazz clubs in Harlem, art galleries in Soho, quiet dinners in Little Italy. Each moment with Liam was a reminder that love could be a home, even when family turned away. But the pain lingered. At night, John would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Should he have stayed silent? Could he have spared himself the shame? Liam, sensing his turmoil, would pull him close, whispering stories of his own coming out, a kinder experience, with parents who embraced him. "They'll come around," Liam said one night, his voice soft against John's ear. "Or we'll build our own family." John wanted to believe it, but the wound was fresh. He didn't know how to heal when the people who raised him saw his love as a sin. Yet, as winter settled over New York, something shifted. Clara sent a tentative text, "I miss you." It was small, but it was a crack in the wall. John replied, keeping it light, but hope flickered in his chest. Weeks passed, and John and Liam grew closer. They hosted a small holiday party in their apartment, filling it with friends, artists, writers, and co-workers who celebrated their love without judgment. The laughter and warmth felt like a new beginning. John started to see a future where he didn't need his father's approval, where love was enough. But then, one freezing January evening, a knock came at their door. John opened it to find his father standing there, his face gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed. "John," Richard said, his voice breaking. "I need to talk." John froze, his hand still on the doorknob, the cold air from the hallway seeping into the apartment. Richard stood there, his usual commanding presence diminished, his coat dusted with snow. Liam appeared behind John, his hand resting lightly on his shoulder, a silent show of strength. "Dad," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Richard's eyes darted to Liam, then back to John. "Can we talk? Alone?" His tone was softer than John had ever heard, but the request stung. Alone meant without Liam, the man who'd held him together when his family tore him apart. Liam squeezed John's shoulder. "I'll be in the kitchen," he said, his voice calm but firm. He retreated, leaving John and his father in the dim light of the living room. The space felt smaller with Richard in it, the weight of their history pressing down. John gestured to the couch, but neither sat. "Why are you here?" he asked, crossing his arms. His heart pounded, torn between anger and a fragile hope he didn't want to acknowledge. Richard ran a hand through his thinning hair, his face etched with exhaustion. "I was wrong," he said, the words clumsy, as if they'd been rehearsed but still felt foreign. "What I said at Thanksgiving, I didn't mean it." "Not like that." John's jaw tightened. "You called me filthy. In front of everyone. You threw me out." The memory burned, vivid and raw. He could still see his mother's averted gaze, his cousin's uncomfortable silence. "I know," Richard said, his voice cracking. "I was angry. I didn't understand." He paused, swallowing hard. "Your mother, she's been sick. John. Really sick. And it made me think about you, about what matters." John's breath caught. "Mom's sick." His mind raced, guilt and fear twisting together. Why hadn't Clara told him? Why hadn't anyone reached out? "Lung cancer," Richard said, his eyes glistening. "Stage 3. She didn't want you to know until we were sure. But it's bad, and I couldn't stop thinking about you." About what I said, John felt the room tilt. His mother, the quiet force who'd always tried to bridge the gap between him and his father, was fighting for her life. And he hadn't known. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice breaking. Richard looked down. "I was ashamed. After what I did, I didn't think you'd want to hear from me." He took a shaky breath. "But I'm here now. I'm sorry, John. I don't understand everything about who you are. But I want to try." John's chest ached, torn between the apology he'd longed for and the pain that still lingered. He wanted to believe his father, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered by a single word. "You hurt me," he said, his voice low. "You made me feel like I was nothing." Richard nodded, his face crumpling. "I know. I was wrong. I'm asking for a chance to make it right." John glanced toward the kitchen, where Liam was pretending to busy himself with dishes. He thought of the nights Liam had held him, the promises they'd made to build a life together. Could he let his father back in? Could he forgive? "I need time," John said finally. "And I need you to respect Liam. He's not going anywhere." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "I'll try," he said. "For you. For your mother." After Richard left, John sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Liam sat beside him, silent but present. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I don't know," John admitted. "Mom's sick, and he's sorry, but it's a lot." He leaned into Liam, drawing strength from his warmth. "I want to see her, but I'm scared." Liam kissed his forehead. "We'll go together. Whatever you need." The next day, John called Clara. Her voice was soft, strained. "Mom wanted to tell you herself," she said. "She's been asking for you." John's heart clenched. He booked a train to upstate New York, Liam by his side. The ride was quiet, the winter landscape blurring past, a mirror to John's tangled thoughts. At the hospital, Ellen looked frail, her once vibrant eyes dulled by illness. But when she saw John, her face lit up. "My boy," she whispered, reaching for him. John took her hand, tears spilling over. Liam stood back, giving them space but never leaving the room. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," John said, his voice thick. "You're here now," Ellen replied, her grip weak but firm. "That's enough." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers, a stark contrast to the warmth of John's childhood home. Ellen's hand felt fragile in his, her skin paper thin, but her smile held the same love he'd always known. John sat by her bedside, grappling with the reality that time with her was slipping away. Liam stood near the window, his presence a quiet anchor. John had introduced him to Ellen, nervous but resolute. "Mom, this is Liam," he'd said, his voice steady. Ellen had looked at Liam, then back at John, her eyes softening. "He makes you happy," she said simply. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement, and it meant everything. Richard lingered in the hallway, his discomfort palpable. John caught glimpses of him pacing, his broad shoulders hunched. The apology from the night before echoed in John's mind, but it felt incomplete, overshadowed by years of distance and that one unforgivable word. Still, seeing his mother's condition forced John to confront a truth. Holding on to anger might cost him the chance to heal. Over the next few days, John and Liam stayed in a nearby motel, visiting Ellen daily. Clara joined them, her presence a bridge between the fractured family. She told John how Richard had been unraveling since Thanksgiving. his guilt eating away at him. "He's been reading," she said, almost surprised. "Books about, understanding. He's trying." John. John wasn't sure what to feel. Part of him wanted to cling to his pain, to make his father earn every inch of forgiveness. But another part, the part that saw his mother's fading strength, urged him to let go. He and Liam talked late into the night, their conversations weaving between hope and fear. "You don't have to forgive him right away," Liam said, his hand tracing circles on John's back. "But maybe give him a chance to show you he means it." One afternoon, Richard asked John to walk with him in the hospital garden. The air was crisp, the ground dusted with snow. They stood by a barren tree, the silence heavy. "I don't know how to do this," Richard admitted, his voice rough. "I was raised to believe certain things. But I see you with Liam, and it's not what I thought." John's heart thudded. "What did you think?" he asked, his tone sharp but curious. Richard hesitated. "I thought it was wrong. Sinful. But then I saw your mother fighting, and I realized I could lose you both. I don't want to lose you." "John." The words hit hard. John wanted to believe them, but trust was a steep climb. "You have to do better," he said. "Not just for me, but for Liam. For Mom." Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I'm trying. I'll keep trying." Back at the hospital, Ellen's condition worsened. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, their words a blur of percentages and timelines. John felt helpless, his finance degree useless against the reality of loss. Liam, ever steady, helped him navigate the grief, reminding him to eat, to rest, to breathe. Their love felt like a lifeline, grounding John when everything else was slipping. One evening, as snow fell outside, Ellen called John and Liam to her side. "I want you to promise me something," she said, her voice weak but firm. "Don't let anger define you. Love each other. Build something beautiful." Her eyes moved to Liam, and she smiled. "Take care, my boy." Liam nodded, tears in his eyes. "Always," he said. John felt a sob rise in his throat. He wanted to promise her everything, to make her proud, but the weight of her words settled deep. That night, he and Liam held each other in the motel room, the world outside quiet and cold. "We'll make it through," Liam whispered, and John clung to the hope in his voice. As February dawned, John and Richard began to talk more, not easily, but honestly. Richard asked questions, awkward but earnest, about John's life, about Liam. John answered cautiously, testing the waters. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Spring crept into upstate New York, but the hospital room remained a world apart, suspended in time. John spent every moment he could with Ellen, reading to her from her favorite novels, sharing stories of his life in the city. Liam joined him, his presence a quiet comfort, and together they filled the room with love, even as Ellen's strength faded. Richard was there too, more often now, his efforts to connect with John growing less strained. He brought coffee, asked about John's work, even ventured a question about Liam's art, a series of vibrant paintings inspired by the city. "They're colorful," Richard said, stumbling over the words but trying. John saw the effort, and though it didn't erase the past, it softened the edges of his anger. One morning, Ellen took a turn for the worse. The doctors adjusted her medication, but their faces betrayed the truth. time was running out. John sat by her bed, holding her hand, while Liam and Clara stood nearby. Richard hovered at the door, his face etched with grief. "I should have been better," he whispered to John later, outside the room. To her. "To you." John nodded, his throat tight. "You can still be better," he said. "For her. For us." That night, John and Liam returned to their motel, exhausted but bound by a shared resolve. "She's proud of you," Liam said, pulling John close. "And I'm proud of you." They stood on the motel balcony, the stars bright above, and John felt a flicker of hope. His mother's love, Liam's strength, even Richard's faltering steps, they were threads weaving a new tapestry. Days later, Ellen slipped into a coma. The family gathered, a quiet vigil in the sterile room. John held her hand, whispering memories of childhood summers, of her laughter, her warmth. Liam sat beside him, his presence a steady anchor. Richard stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down his face, a man undone by regret. Ellen passed in the early hours of a March morning, her breathing soft until it wasn't. John felt the loss like a physical blow, but Liam's arm around him kept him upright. Clara sobbed into Richard's chest, and for the first time, John saw his father's vulnerability, not as weakness, but as humanity. The funeral was small, held in the church where John had spent his childhood Sundays. He and Liam sat in the front pew, hands clasped, their love a quiet defiance. Richard delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke of Ellen's kindness, her strength. He looked at John as he finished, his eyes pleading for something unspoken. After the service, Richard approached John and Liam outside the church. "I want to understand," he said, his voice raw. "I want to be part of your life. Both of you." It wasn't perfect, but it was a promise, fragile and real. John felt the weight of the moment, the choice before him. He looked at Liam, whose steady gaze gave him courage. "We'll try," John said. "But it's going to take time." Richard nodded, his relief palpable. "That's all I ask." Back in Manhattan, John and Liam began to rebuild. They hosted dinners with friends, planned a trip to Provincetown, dreamed of a future where love was enough. John started therapy, unpacking the pain of his father's words and the loss of his mother. Liam painted, his canvases vibrant with hope, each one a love letter to their life together. Richard called weekly, his questions growing less awkward, his interest genuine. He asked about Liam's art, about John's job, about their plans. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. John began to see his father not as the man who'd hurt him, but as someone trying to change. Summer arrived in New York, the city pulsing with life. John and Liam's apartment became a haven, filled with art, laughter, and the scent of Liam's cooking. They were building something real, something that felt like home, even as John navigated the grief of losing Ellen and the slow repair of his relationship with Richard. Richard's efforts continued, tentative but persistent. He visited the city, joining John and Liam for coffee in Chelsea, asking about their lives with a sincerity that surprised John. One evening, Richard invited them to dinner at a quiet restaurant in the West Village. "I want to know you," he said to Liam, his voice steady. Both of you, Liam, ever gracious, shared stories of his childhood in Oregon, his love for painting, his dreams of opening a gallery. Richard listened, nodding, asking questions. John watched, his heart caught between skepticism and hope. This was the father he'd wanted, flawed, but trying. But healing wasn't linear. Some days, John's anger flared, the memory of filthy cutting through his progress. He'd snap at Richard over small things, testing his father's commitment. Richard didn't retreat. "I'm not going anywhere," he said once, after a tense call. "I messed up. I'll keep showing up." Clara, too, became a bridge. She visited often, bringing stories of their mother, keeping her memory alive. She adored Liam, teasing him about his artsy vibe and dragging him to thrift stores to hunt for vintage finds. Through her, John saw a family rebuilding, piece by piece. One evening, Liam surprised John with a rooftop picnic, the city skyline glittering below. They ate sandwiches, drank wine, and danced to soft music from a portable speaker. "This is us," Liam said, pulling John close. "This is our family." John kissed him, the weight of the past lighter in that moment, carried away by the summer breeze. Richard's transformation wasn't perfect. He stumbled, misstepping with questions that betrayed his old biases. But he corrected himself, apologized, kept learning. John saw the effort, and slowly, trust grew. They began to share more memories of Ellen, stories of John's childhood, plans for the future. By late summer, John and Liam decided to host a barbecue at a friend's house in Brooklyn. They invited Richard and Clara, a test of their new dynamic. Richard arrived with a homemade pie, a gesture so unlike him that John laughed. The day was warm, filled with music, laughter, and friends who embraced John and Liam without question. Richard watched, quieter than usual, but his smile was genuine. As the sun set, Richard pulled John aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick. "I don't say it enough, but I am." John felt tears prick his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was enough for now. That night, John and Liam lay in bed, the city's hum of familiar comfort. "We're going to be okay," John said, his voice soft but certain. Liam smiled, his hand finding John's. "We already are." Fall returned to New York, the leaves turning gold as John and Liam's love deepened. They were planning a future, talks of marriage, a home, maybe even a dog. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined them. John had learned to carry his grief for Ellen alongside his joy, and his relationship with Richard was slowly becoming something new. One crisp October evening, Richard invited John and Liam to the family home in upstate New York. It was the first time John had been back since Thanksgiving, and the memories lingered as they pulled into the driveway. But the house felt different now, warmer, with Clara's art on the walls and Richard's attempt at cooking filling the air. Dinner was simple, but the conversation flowed. Richard asked Liam about his latest painting, a vibrant piece inspired by their rooftop picnic. He listened, engaged, even laughed at Liam's jokes. Clara teased John about his finance job, calling him Wall Street's softest heart. For the first time, John felt like he belonged, not as the son who disappointed, but as himself. After dinner, Richard led them to the living room, where a photo of Ellen sat on the mantel. "She'd be happy," he said, his voice soft. "Seeing us like this." John nodded, his throat tight. He saw his mother in Richard's eyes, in Clara's smile, in the love that had carried them through. Later, as they sat by the fire, Richard spoke. "I was wrong," he said, looking at John and Liam. "Not just at Thanksgiving, but for years. I didn't see you, John. I didn't try. But I see you now." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry. And I'm grateful you gave me a chance." John felt the weight of those words, the final piece of a puzzle he'd been assembling. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice steady. "Both of you." He reached for Liam's hand, their fingers intertwining. The night ended with laughter, stories, and a promise to keep building. John and Liam drove back to the city, the stars bright above. "We did it," Liam said, his smile radiant. "We made it through." John nodded, his heart full. His father's cruelty had once broken him. But love, Liam's, Ellen's, even Richard's imperfect love, had pieced him back together. They'd built a family. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough.